The morning fog hung thick over Naval Air Station Fallen as Captain Sarah Chen adjusted her flight suit one final time. The fabric felt foreign against her skin after 6 months of desk duty, pushing papers and attending briefings that seemed to multiply like bacteria in a petri dish. She had volunteered for this joint training exercise partly to escape the suffocating routine of administrative work, but mostly because something deep inside her missed the roar of jet engines and the precise dance of aerial combat. The briefing room buzzed with testosterone-fueled chatter as she entered. 32 elite military personnel from various branches had gathered for Operation Desert Forge, a grueling 2-week exercise designed to test interoperability between different Special Forces units. Sarah recognized the type immediately: Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Air Force Pararescue, and Marine Force Recon. All of them were men, all of them looked like they could bench press a small aircraft, and all of them turned to stare when she walked in. She chose a seat in the middle of the room, ignoring the whispered conversations and sideways glances. This wasn't her first rodeo with skeptical special operators. During her 12 years in the Navy, she had learned that respect was earned through action, not words or arguments. The doubters would either learn or continue doubting. Their opinion wouldn't change her ability to fly. Captain Jake "Hammer" Morrison strode to the front of the room with the confident swagger that came naturally to SEAL team leaders. His reputation preceded him: 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Silver Star earned during a particularly nasty firefight in Afghanistan. The man was a legend in special operations circles, the kind of operator who could infiltrate an enemy compound, eliminate the target, and be back at base camp before anyone realized he'd been gone. "Gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. His eyes briefly paused on Sarah, and she caught the almost imperceptible hesitation before he continued. "And lady, welcome to Desert Forge. Over the next 2 weeks, you'll be pushed beyond what you think are your limits. We'll be conducting joint operations that require seamless coordination between air, land, and sea assets." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of aircraft engines and the occasional creak of metal chairs as operators shifted their weight. Morrison's presence commanded attention in a way that couldn't be taught or faked. It came from years of leading men into situations where mistakes meant body bags and hesitation meant mission failure. "This exercise is designed to simulate real-world scenarios where different units must work together under extreme conditions," Morrison continued, packing slowly across the front of the room. "You'll face enemy forces equipped with advanced weaponry, navigate hostile terrain, and make life-or-death decisions with incomplete information. Some of you will excel. Others will discover that their limitations extend beyond what they previously understood." Sarah listened intently, cataloging every detail of the mission parameters. The exercise would begin with a mock rescue operation deep in the Nevada desert, followed by urban warfare scenarios, maritime interdiction exercises, and culminating in a complex multi-domain operation that would test every skill they possessed. "Each of you was selected because you represent the elite of your respective units," Morrison said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "But being the best in your own sandbox doesn't automatically translate to success in joint operations. This exercise will separate the truly exceptional from those who simply think they are." A few of the operators chuckled, the kind of confident laughter that came from men who had never met a challenge they couldn't overcome through sheer determination and superior training. Sarah remained silent, her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that in rooms full of alpha personalities, sometimes the smartest move was to let others reveal their cards first. Morrison pulled down a tactical map of the training area, revealing a complex terrain of mountains, valleys, and simulated urban environments. "Your first mission begins at 500 tomorrow. You'll be divided into mixed teams, with each team including personnel from at least 3 different branches. The scenario involves the rescue of a high-value target from a fortified compound, followed by extraction under heavy enemy fire." The room erupted in questions about rules of engagement, available assets, and mission parameters. Morrison answered each query with the patience of a teacher and the precision of a surgeon. It was clear that every aspect of the exercise had been meticulously planned to create maximum stress and confusion. "One final point," Morrison said, raising his hand to quiet the room. "This exercise will require close air support, precision bombing runs, and complex aerial maneuvers. Success or failure may depend entirely on the skill of our pilots. He paused, scanning the room with deliberate slowness. His eyes lingered on each face, taking inventory of the assembled warriors like a general inspecting his troops before battle. The silence stretched until it became almost uncomfortable. "Which brings me to an important question," Morrison continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "We'll need combat pilots capable of operating in contested airspace, delivering ordnance on target under fire, and extracting personnel from hot landing zones. This isn't a training flight over friendly territory. This is simulated combat against a thinking enemy who will do everything possible to shoot you down." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She knew where this was heading, and part of her relished the moment that was coming. Around the room, several operators straightened in their chairs, clearly expecting to volunteer for whatever challenge Morrison was about to present. "The question is simple," Morrison said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Who among you is a qualified combat pilot?" For a moment, nobody moved. The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, heavy and loaded with implications. Several of the operators glanced around the room, apparently surprised that the legendary SEAL captain didn't already know the answer to his own question. Then, without fanfare or hesitation, Sarah Chen stood up. The reaction was immediate and varied. Some operators looked genuinely surprised, others skeptical, and a few seemed almost amused. She had expected this response. It came with the territory of being the only woman in a room full of special operations personnel who were accustomed to certain assumptions about combat roles. Morrison's expression didn't change, but she caught something in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or maybe just the calculating look of a professional warrior reassessing his assumptions. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her Navy flight suit, her confident posture, and the way she met his gaze without flinching. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," he said finally, reading the name tape on her uniform. "What's your aviation background?" 12 years naval aviation," she replied, her voice steady and professional. "FA-18 Super Hornet, 3 combat deployments, 237 carrier landings, 43 combat missions." The room had gone completely silent. Even the background noise of the air station seemed to fade away as every person present focused on the exchange taking place at the front of the room. Sarah could feel the weight of their attention, but it didn't intimidate her. She had faced far more hostile audiences than a room full of skeptical operators. "Combat missions where?" Morrison asked, his tone remaining neutral but with an undertone that suggested he was genuinely interested in her answer. "Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Close air support, precision strikes, and combat air patrol. I've dropped ordnance in anger and been shot at by surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft artillery, and small arms fire." One of the rangers in the back of the room let out a low whistle, apparently impressed despite himself. Sarah caught the sound but didn't acknowledge it, keeping her attention focused on Morrison. This was his show, and she understood that how he handled this moment would set the tone for the entire exercise. Morrison nodded slowly, processing the information. "Any carrier qualifications beyond the Super Hornet?" "Cross-trained on the F-35 Sea Lightning II," Sarah responded. "Also qualified on the EA-18G Growler for electronic warfare missions." "Combat time in the Growler?" 18 missions over Syria. Electronic attack against integrated air defense systems and communications networks. Morrison's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Electronic warfare missions were among the most dangerous and technically challenging operations in military aviation. Flying into heavily defended airspace to jam enemy radar and communications required not just exceptional piloting skills, but also deep understanding of electronic warfare tactics and the ability to make split-second decisions while being actively hunted by enemy systems. "Any instructor time?" Morrison asked. 2 years at Naval Air Station Kingsville, training new Super Hornet pilots. Before that, 6 months at the Navy Fighter Weapons School. "Top Gun," someone in the room murmured, and Sarah heard the note of respect in the voice. Morrison stepped closer, his demeanor still professional but with increased intensity. "Lieutenant Commander, this exercise will involve missions that push aircraft and pilots to their absolute limits. We're talking about precision strikes on moving targets, close air support with friendlies within 50 meters of the target, and extraction from landing zones under direct fire. The margin for error is essentially zero." Sarah met his gaze directly. Captain, with respect, that describes most of my combat missions over the past decade. For several seconds, Morrison said nothing. The silence stretched until Sarah could hear individual operators breathing, the distant sound of aircraft engines, and the subtle hum of the building's air conditioning system. She recognized this moment. It was the point where a leader decided whether to trust or continue testing. "Outstanding," Morrison said finally. "You'll be flying lead for all air operations during this exercise." The announcement sent a ripple of surprise through the room. Several operators exchanged glances, and Sarah caught fragments of whispered conversations. She had expected some resistance, possibly even outright challenges to her qualifications. Instead, Morrison had made his decision quickly and decisively, the mark of a leader who trusted his own judgment over popular opinion. "Sir," one of the Rangers spoke up, "no disrespect to the lieutenant commander, but shouldn't we verify?" Morrison's hand came up, cutting off the question before it could be completed. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, are you questioning my assessment of personnel qualifications?" The Ranger straightened immediately. "No, sir, absolutely not, sir." "Good, because I don't make personnel decisions based on assumptions or stereotypes. I make them based on qualifications, experience, and demonstrated competence." Morrison's voice carried a warning that every person in the room understood. The subject was closed. Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and wariness. Morrison's support was valuable, but it also meant that any failures would reflect on his judgment as much as her abilities. The pressure was now doubled. She had to succeed not just for herself, but to validate his decision to trust her. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," Morrison continued, "you'll have access to two FA-18E Super Hornets configured for multi-role operations. Weapons loadout will vary depending on the mission, but expect everything from precision-guided munitions to close air support ordnance." "Understood, sir. Will there be a wingman assigned?" Morrison smiled for the first time since the briefing began. "That depends. Do you prefer flying solo or do you work well with others?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Solo missions offered complete control and eliminated the risk of coordination failures, but complex operations often required multiple aircraft for maximum effectiveness. Her answer would signal not just her preferences, but her understanding of teamwork and tactical flexibility. "I prefer whatever configuration gives the ground forces the best chance of mission success," she replied. "If that means flying solo for a precision strike, I'm comfortable with that. If it means coordinating with a wingman for a complex operation, I can handle that too." "Excellent answer. You'll have a wingman when the mission requires it, solo ops when it doesn't. The decisions will be yours based on tactical requirements." Morrison turned back to address the entire room. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet your close air support for the next 2 weeks. I suggest you get acquainted with Lieutenant Commander Chen's capabilities, because your lives may depend on her skills." As the briefing concluded and operators began filing out of the room, Sarah remained seated, reviewing her notes and mentally preparing for the challenges ahead. She was acutely aware that every person in that room would be watching her performance, some hoping for success and others perhaps expecting failure. The weight of representation wasn't new to her. She had carried it throughout her career, knowing that her successes and failures would be viewed through the lens of gender rather than individual merit. But she had learned to channel that pressure into motivation, using skepticism as fuel for exceptional performance. Tomorrow would bring the first test, and Sarah Chen was ready to prove once again that excellence had nothing to do with the assumptions people brought to the fight. The alarm pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 4:30, jolting Sarah from a restless sleep filled with dreams of burning aircraft and impossible rescue missions. She had learned years ago that the night before a challenging operation always brought vivid nightmares, her mind's way of processing the stress and preparing for potential scenarios. She rolled out of her narrow bunk in the temporary quarters, muscles already shifting into the familiar rhythm of combat preparation. The hangar smelled of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the metallic tang of weapons systems being armed for live-fire exercises. Sarah approached her assigned FA-18E Super Hornet with the reverent attention of a musician approaching a Stradivarius violin. Every pre-flight inspection was both a technical requirement and a personal ritual, her hands moving across control surfaces, engine intakes, and weapon pylons with practiced precision. Her aircraft had been configured for the day's mission, a complex rescue operation that would require precision strikes, close air support, and rapid extraction from a hostile landing zone. The weapons loadout included guided bombs for hardened targets, cluster munitions for area denial, and a 20mm cannon for close-in work. Every pound of ordnance had been carefully calculated to provide maximum flexibility without compromising aircraft performance. As Sarah completed her external inspection, she became aware of approaching footsteps. Captain Morrison appeared around the nose of the aircraft, followed by 3 operators she recognized from the previous day's briefing: Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the ranger who had questioned her qualifications, along with Petty Officer First Class Williams, a Navy SEAL, and Sergeant Major Thompson, a Force Recon Marine. "Good morning, Lieutenant Commander," Morrison said, his tone professional but with an undertone of curiosity. "Mind if we observe your pre-flight routine?" Sarah recognized the request for what it was, a final assessment of her professionalism and attention to detail. These men needed to trust her with their lives, and watching her prepare for flight would either build that confidence or confirm their doubts. "Not at all, sir," she replied, continuing her inspection without missing a beat. "I'm checking the electronic warfare pods for proper seating and connector integrity. Today's mission profile suggests we'll be operating in an environment with simulated surface-to-air missile threats." She pointed to the sophisticated equipment mounted beneath the aircraft's wings. "These ALQ-99 jamming pods will provide protection against enemy radar systems, but they're only effective if properly calibrated and securely mounted. A loose connection could mean the difference between completing the mission and becoming a smoking hole in the desert." Thompson, the Marine, stepped closer to examine the pod she was inspecting. "How do you know if the calibration is correct?" "Pre-flight diagnostics will verify electronic systems," Sarah explained, "but physical inspection reveals problems that computers might miss. A cracked housing, loose mounting bolt, or damaged antenna could cause system failure at the worst possible moment." She moved to the next inspection point, checking the aircraft's air-to-surface missiles for proper seating in their launch rails. "These Mavericks are designed for precision strikes against hardened targets. The guidance system requires perfect alignment between the missile's seeker head and the aircraft's targeting systems." Williams, the SEAL, watched intently as she performed the inspection. "What's your backup plan if the primary guidance fails?" "Depends on the target and tactical situation," Sarah replied without hesitation. "For stationary targets, I can switch to GPS-guided bombs or use the cannon for direct fire. For moving targets, I'd coordinate with ground spotters for laser designation or fall back to visual targeting if conditions permit." Rodriguez had remained silent during the exchange, but Sarah noticed him taking careful notes in a tactical notebook. His initial skepticism was still evident, but it was being tempered by professional curiosity about her methods and knowledge. "What about extraction under fire?" Morrison asked. "The scenario calls for pickup from a hot landing zone with enemy forces in direct contact with our ground team." Sarah paused in her inspection to look directly at Morrison. "Hot extractions are about timing, communication, and suppressive fire. The ground team needs to mark their position clearly, maintain constant radio contact, and be ready to move the instant the extraction bird touches down. My job is to keep enemy heads down with precise cannon fire and coordinate with the rescue helicopter for optimal approach vectors." "How close can you put cannon rounds to friendly forces?" Thompson asked. "Regulation minimum is 50 meters, but I've delivered effective fire at half that distance when the tactical situation demanded it." Sarah's voice carried no bravado, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating verifiable capabilities. "The key is constant communication with ground controllers and absolute precision in target identification." Morrison nodded approvingly. "What's your preferred method for marking friendly positions during close air support?" "Infrared strobes for night operations, colored smoke for daylight. Laser designation when available. But the most important thing is maintaining voice contact with someone who has eyes on both friendly and enemy positions." Sarah completed her external inspection and moved toward the aircraft's cockpit. "Gentlemen, you're welcome to continue observing, but I need to begin the internal systems check. First launch is scheduled for 5:45. As she climbed into the cockpit, Sarah was acutely aware that her every movement was being scrutinized by men whose lives would depend on her skills in the coming hours. The familiar embrace of the ejection seat and the complex array of switches, screens, and controls felt like coming home after a long absence. The internal systems check was a choreographed sequence of button presses, switch movements, and instrument readings that had become second nature through thousands of hours of flight time. Each system was verified independently before being integrated into the overall aircraft configuration. Communications, navigation, weapons control, electronic warfare, engine parameters. Every component had to function perfectly before she would consider the aircraft ready for combat operations. "Lieutenant Commander," Morrison called from beside the aircraft, "what's your assessment of today's weather conditions?" Sarah glanced at the meteorological display on her multifunction screen. "Winds are 15 knots from the northwest, visibility unlimited, ceiling and visibility okay. Temperature and humidity are within normal parameters. Should be excellent flying conditions for precision work." "And if the weather deteriorates during the mission?" "I carry weather radar and have access to real-time updates from multiple sources. If conditions become unsafe for close air support, I'll advise ground forces and recommend alternative tactics." Williams stepped closer to the cockpit. "Ma'am, can I ask about your combat experience? The missions you mentioned yesterday, what were they like?" Sarah paused in her systems check, considering how much detail to share. These men needed to understand her capabilities, but combat experiences were deeply personal things that didn't always translate well to briefing room discussions. "Syria was probably the most challenging," she said finally. "Electronic warfare missions against integrated air defense systems. The enemy had modern surface-to-air missiles, radar-guided artillery, and fighters of their own. Every mission involved flying into heavily defended airspace where they were actively trying to kill us." "How do you handle that kind of stress?" Rodriguez asked, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine professional interest. "Training and preparation. By the time you're in the cockpit flying toward the target, you've rehearsed every aspect of the mission dozens of times. Your hands know where every switch is located, your brain has considered every possible contingency, and your muscle memory takes over when things get intense." Sarah continued her systems check while talking, her hands moving automatically through the familiar sequence. "The other thing is trust in your equipment and training. This aircraft is an incredibly sophisticated machine designed by brilliant engineers and maintained by dedicated technicians. If I do my job correctly and the aircraft performs as designed, we'll complete the mission and return safely." "What about when things go wrong?" Thompson asked. "When the plan falls apart and you have to improvise?" "That's when experience matters most. Combat teaches you to think quickly, adapt to changing conditions, and make decisions with incomplete information. You learn to trust your instincts and fall back on fundamental principles when everything else fails." Morrison checked his watch. "Lieutenant Commander, we need to let you finish your preparation. The ground teams are moving into position and will need air support in 30 minutes. "Understood, sir. I'll be airborne in 15 minutes and on station at the designated time." As the operators moved away from the aircraft, Sarah heard Rodriguez speaking quietly to Williams. "I've got to admit she knows her stuff. That wasn't just book learning, she's got real experience." "Morrison wouldn't have assigned her to this mission if he had any doubts," Williams replied. "The captain doesn't take chances with personnel lives." Sarah smiled slightly as she completed her final systems checks. Earning the respect of special operators was never easy, but it was worth the effort. These men would follow orders regardless, but they would fight harder and take greater risks if they truly believed in their air support. The engine start sequence filled the cockpit with the familiar whine of turbines spinning up to operating speed. Sarah ran through her final checks: flight controls, weapon systems, communications, navigation equipment, each item verified and confirmed ready for combat operations. "Tower, this is Viper 1 requesting taxi clearance for immediate departure." "Viper 1, Tower, you are cleared to taxi to runway 09er. Wind is 150 at 12 knots. Contact departure control on frequency 254.7 after takeoff." Sarah guided the Super Hornet through the maze of taxiways leading to the active runway, the aircraft's powerful engines providing thrust, while sophisticated flight control computers maintained perfect stability during ground operations. At the runway threshold, she performed her final checks and armed the aircraft's defensive systems. Tower, Viper 1 ready for immediate departure. Viper 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Contact departure control passing through 1,000 feet. Sarah pushed the throttles forward to military power, feeling the familiar acceleration as 44,000 pounds of thrust pressed her back into the ejection seat. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, climbing rapidly into the clear Nevada sky. Below, she could see the exercise area spreading out like a tactical map, complete with simulated enemy positions, friendly forces moving toward their objectives, and the complex terrain that would challenge every aspect of their training. Departure control, Viper 1 airborne and climbing to assigned altitude. Viper 1, departure control. Climb and maintain flight level 200. Contact ground control on frequency 296.4 for mission tasking. As Sarah leveled off at 20,000 feet, she activated her targeting systems and began scanning for the exercise participants below. The real test was about to begin, and every person involved knew that success or failure would depend on seamless coordination between air and ground forces. Her radio crackled with the first transmission from the ground team. Viper 1, this is Hammer 6. We're approaching the objective and requesting immediate reconnaissance of the target area. Sarah smiled as she rolled into a gentle turn toward the coordinates provided. Captain Morrison, Hammer 6, was about to discover whether his faith in her abilities had been justified. The hunt was beginning. The target compound materialized on Sarah's targeting display like a deadly puzzle waiting to be solved. From 20,000 feet, the mock enemy installation looked deceptively peaceful. A collection of concrete buildings surrounded by defensive positions, vehicle parks, and what appeared to be a sophisticated air defense network. Her sensors painted a different picture, revealing the complex challenges that awaited the ground assault team. Hammer 6, Viper 1. I have eyes on the objective, counting 6 buildings in the main compound, multiple defensive positions, and at least 3 vehicles that could be mobile launchers. Recommend you hold position while I conduct detailed reconnaissance. Morrison's voice came through her headset with characteristic calm authority. Copy, Viper 1. Ground team is holding at Checkpoint Alpha. What's your assessment of enemy strength and disposition? Sarah activated her aircraft's advanced sensors, sweeping the compound with infrared imaging, signals intelligence equipment, and high-resolution cameras. The exercise controllers had done an impressive job creating a realistic scenario. The simulated enemy forces were positioned exactly where competent defenders would place them, with overlapping fields of fire and multiple fallback positions. Hammer 6, I'm seeing approximately 30 to 40 personnel in defensive positions around the perimeter. 2 guard towers with heavy machine gun positions, several bunkers that likely contain additional weapons, and what appears to be a command bunker in the center building. The bad news is they've got simulated surface-to-air missiles in at least 2 locations. Can you neutralize the air defenses before we begin our assault? Sarah studied her targeting display, calculating angles of attack, collateral damage estimates, and the precise sequence of strikes needed to clear a path for the ground assault. Affirmative. I can take out the SAM sites with precision strikes, but I'll need to coordinate the timing with your approach. The enemy will know they're under attack the moment I release ordnance. Understood. What do you need from us? I need your team positioned for immediate assault when I begin the strikes. The window of surprise will be very short, maybe 60 seconds between my first bomb impact and when they're fully alert and repositioned. Sarah pulled up the mission planning software on her cockpit display, rapidly calculating the optimal attack sequence. The SAM sites had to be eliminated first to protect her aircraft during subsequent strikes, then the guard towers to suppress defensive fire. Finally, precision strikes on the bunkers to neutralize remaining resistance. Hammer 6, here's the sequence. I'll approach from the northeast at low altitude to avoid their radar coverage. First target is the eastern SAM site, followed immediately by the western site. That should give me freedom to maneuver for the remaining targets. Time from first impact to completion of the strike sequence will be approximately 90 seconds. Copy all, Viper 1. Ground team will begin movement toward the compound on your first bomb impact. We'll breach the perimeter during your strikes on the bunkers. Sarah began her descent toward the target area, the sophisticated flight management system automatically adjusting engine power, control surface positions, and weapon system parameters for low-altitude attack operations. At 5,000 feet, She leveled off and activated her terrain-following radar, allowing the aircraft to maintain a precise altitude above the desert floor while avoiding detection by enemy sensors. The attack run required absolute precision. Too high an enemy radar would detect her approach, too low, and she risked controlled flight into terrain. The Super Hornet's fly-by-wire control system made such precision possible, but it still demanded constant attention from the pilot to ensure that automated systems were functioning correctly. Viper 1, this is Overwatch 7, a new voice interrupted her concentration. We have drone coverage of the target area and are tracking multiple heat signatures moving within the compound. Looks like they're aware something is happening. Sarah acknowledged the intelligence update while continuing her approach. Overwatch 7 was the exercise controller's eyes in the sky, an unmanned aircraft equipped with sophisticated sensors that could provide real-time intelligence to all participating units. Their observation about increased activity in the compound was concerning but not unexpected. Overwatch 7, Viper 1. Can you identify any changes in the defensive positions? Are they repositioning to counter an air attack? Negative, Viper 1. Defensive positions remain static, but personnel movement has increased significantly. Recommend you expedite your approach. Sarah checked her targeting display one final time before beginning the actual attack run. The first target, the Eastern SAM site, was clearly marked on her screen, with precise GPS coordinates and a detailed image showing the exact aim point for maximum effectiveness. Modern precision-guided munitions made such accuracy possible, but they still required perfect execution from the pilot to ensure success. Hammer 6, Viper 1 beginning attack run. First target in 30 seconds. Copy, Viper 1. Ground team is moving. Sarah armed her weapon systems and selected the appropriate ordnance for the first target. The GBU-12 Paveway laser-guided bomb was perfect for precision strikes against hardened targets, powerful enough to destroy the simulated SAM site while minimizing collateral damage to surrounding structures. The laser designator locked onto the target, painting it with an invisible beam that would guide the bomb to its exact impact point. Sarah's heads-up display showed perfect tracking, with all weapon system parameters in the green. She squeezed the release button, feeling the slight shudder as the 500-pound bomb separated from its pylon. Viper 1 rifle, first target engaged. The bomb's flight time was 18 seconds, long enough for Sarah to maneuver toward her second target while monitoring the first weapon's progress. Her display showed the bomb tracking perfectly toward the designated aim point, its laser seeker head maintaining lock despite the aircraft's movement. The explosion bloomed on her infrared display as the bomb found its target, the simulated SAM site disappearing in a cloud of smoke and debris. Exercise controllers immediately transmitted a damage assessment confirming the site's destruction. Good hit, Viper 1. Eastern SAM site is neutralized. Sarah was already maneuvering toward the second target, her aircraft banking sharply to align with the Western SAM site while maintaining the low altitude that kept her below enemy radar coverage. The second bomb was armed and ready, its laser seeker head searching for the target designation. Second target locked, rifle. Another 18-second flight time, during which Sarah began planning her attack on the guard towers. These targets would require different tactics, rapid-fire cannon strikes rather than precision bombs, since the goal was to suppress defensive positions rather than completely destroy fortified structures. The second bomb impacted with devastating precision, eliminating the Western SAM site and clearing the airspace for her remaining attacks. Sarah immediately pulled into a climbing turn, gaining altitude and positioning herself for gun runs against the guard towers. Hammer 6, Viper 1, both SAM sites neutralized, beginning attacks on defensive positions. Recommend your team expedite their assault. Copy, Viper 1. We're at the perimeter fence now. Can you suppress the guard towers? Sarah rolled inverted and pulled into a steep dive toward the first guard tower, the aircraft's gun sight displaying a perfect firing solution on the target. The M61 Vulcan cannon could fire over 6,000 rounds per minute, each 20 projectile capable of devastating effectiveness against personnel and light structures. Viper 1 is in hot on the northern guard tower. She squeezed the trigger, sending a stream of cannon rounds into the simulated defensive position. The high-explosive shells impacted in a tight pattern around the target, the exercise controllers immediately confirming suppression of the enemy position. Northern tower is suppressed. Nice shooting, Viper 1. Sarah pulled out of her dive and immediately maneuvered for an attack on the second guard tower, her aircraft's sophisticated flight control systems managing the high G forces while maintaining perfect weapon tracking. The southern tower fell to her cannon fire with equal precision, clearing the way for the ground assault. Hammer 6, both guard towers are neutralized. Your path is clear for the final assault. Through her sensors, Sarah could see Morrison's team moving swiftly through the compound's outer defenses, their tactical movement precise and coordinated. The weeks of training and preparation were evident in their seamless advance toward the central buildings. Viper 1, we're encountering resistance from the bunkers on the eastern side of the compound. Can you engage those positions? Sarah immediately acquired the targets on her sensor display. The bunkers were more challenging than the previous targets because they were partially underground and positioned close to buildings that might contain friendly personnel after the compound was secured. I can engage with precision strikes, but I need to know the location of your personnel to avoid friendly fire incidents. We're approaching the central building from the west. Eastern bunkers are clear to engage. Sarah selected guided bombs specifically designed for bunker penetration, weapons with delayed fuses that would allow them to penetrate the hardened structures before detonating. The targeting required absolute precision to ensure the bombs would strike at the optimal angle for maximum effectiveness. Viper 1 is in for bunker strikes. Danger close, recommend you take cover. The first bunker disappeared in a controlled explosion as the penetrating warhead found its mark. Sarah immediately maneuvered for the second target, her weapons systems automatically selecting the next bomb in the sequence. Outstanding hits, Viper 1. Eastern resistance is neutralized. Within minutes, Morrison's ground team had secured the compound and successfully extracted the simulated hostage. The entire operation had been executed with textbook precision, demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of properly coordinated air and ground operations. Hammer 6, Viper 1. Mission complete. All targets neutralized, friendly casualties 0, objective secured. Outstanding work by the ground team. Morrison's voice carried a note of satisfaction that was rare for the normally reserved SEAL captain. Viper 1, that was exceptional close air support. Your precision and timing made this mission possible. As Sarah climbed back to altitude for the return flight to base, she reflected on the morning's events. The skeptical operators who had questioned her qualifications the previous day had just witnessed a demonstration of capabilities that spoke louder than any briefing or credentials. But she knew this was just the beginning. Desert Forge would present increasingly complex challenges over the coming days, and each mission would demand everything she had learned during her years of combat flying. The real test was still ahead. 3 days into Desert Forge, the exercise had evolved into something far more challenging than anyone had anticipated. What began as standard training scenarios had become a relentless test of endurance, adaptability, and precision under pressure. Sarah found herself flying multiple sorties each day, supporting different ground teams across increasingly complex mission profiles that pushed both her aircraft and her skills to their absolute limits. The morning briefing revealed the day's scenario: a nighttime rescue operation in mountainous terrain, followed immediately by urban warfare support, and concluding with maritime interdiction exercises. 3 completely different environments requiring different tactics, weapons, and coordination procedures. Sarah studied the mission parameters while consuming her third cup of coffee, the bitter liquid barely keeping exhaustion at bay. Today's operations will test your ability to transition rapidly between mission types, announced Colonel Bradley, the exercise controller. Real-world deployments don't provide the luxury of single-mission focus. Modern military operations demand flexibility and sustained performance across multiple domains. Sarah noted the increased complexity of each phase. The mountain rescue would require precise navigation through narrow valleys while providing close air support in terrain that limited maneuvering options. The urban warfare phase demanded surgical precision to avoid collateral damage in a crowded environment. The maritime mission would involve coordination with naval vessels and the challenge of locating small targets in vast expanses of ocean. Captain Morrison approached her after the briefing, his expression more serious than usual. "Lieutenant Commander, I need to discuss today's mountain phase with you. The scenario involves extraction from a valley surrounded by peaks over 8,000 feet. Weather reports indicate possible cloud cover that could reduce visibility to near zero." Sarah reviewed the topographical charts showing the rescue location, a narrow valley barely wide enough for helicopter operations, surrounded by jagged peaks that would create treacherous wind conditions and severely limit approach options. "What's the backup plan if weather deteriorates below minimums for the extraction helicopter?" "That's the challenge. The ground team will be trapped until conditions improve unless we can find an alternative extraction method." "How about a different landing zone outside the valley? I could provide cover while the team moves to a more accessible location." Morrison shook his head. "Intelligence indicates enemy forces control all the high ground surrounding the valley. The team would have to fight through multiple defensive positions to reach an alternate extraction point." Sarah studied the charts more carefully, looking for tactical options that might not be immediately obvious. The valley's narrow configuration would funnel wind in unpredictable patterns, making helicopter operations extremely dangerous. But those same wind patterns might be exploited by a fixed-wing aircraft capable of precision maneuvering. "What if we consider a non-standard extraction method?" she suggested. "Under the right conditions, I could potentially extract personnel using the aircraft's capabilities in ways not typically employed." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "The Super Hornet can operate from relatively short runways, and I've trained in emergency landing procedures on improvised surfaces. If we can identify a section of the valley floor suitable for aircraft operations, I could potentially land and extract the team directly." "That would be incredibly risky. You'd be operating in confined terrain with no margin for error, and your aircraft would be vulnerable to ground fire during the entire extraction process." Sarah nodded, acknowledging the dangers while continuing to study the topographical data. "Risk versus benefit analysis suggests it might be our only option if weather prevents helicopter operations. The alternative is leaving the ground team in an untenable position. Let's proceed with the standard plan and keep your option as emergency backup. But I want you to study those valley approaches in detail, just in case." The night mountain operation began at 2200 hours, with Sarah flying through darkness so complete that the horizon disappeared entirely. Modern night vision systems and sophisticated navigation equipment made such operations possible, but they still demanded absolute trust in instruments and perfect execution of flight procedures. "Viper 1, this is Sabre 4. We have located the objective and are beginning our descent into the valley. Request immediate reconnaissance of the landing zone." Sarah descended toward the valley floor, her aircraft's sensors penetrating the darkness to reveal the rugged terrain below. The target area was exactly as challenging as the charts had indicated, a narrow strip of relatively flat ground surrounded by towering peaks that blocked radio communications and created severe turbulence. "Sabre 4, Viper 1. Landing zone appears suitable for helicopter operations, but I'm reading significant wind shear between the valley walls. Recommend extreme caution during approach and departure." The rescue helicopter, a U-60 Black Hawk flown by one of the Army's most experienced pilots, began its descent into the valley while Sarah maintained overwatch from above. Her sensors tracked the helicopter's progress while simultaneously monitoring for enemy activity in the surrounding terrain. Suddenly, her weather radar painted an alarming picture. A fast-moving weather front was approaching from the west, bringing with it the thick cloud cover and high winds that would make helicopter operations impossible. "Sabre 4, Viper 1. Weather is deteriorating rapidly from the west. Recommend you expedite extraction procedures." "Copy, Viper 1. We're encountering severe turbulence in the valley. Need another 2 minutes to complete passenger pickup." Sarah watched her meteorological display with growing concern. The approaching weather system was moving faster than forecasted, and the wind conditions were already beyond safe limits for helicopter operations in confined terrain. "Sabre 4, you need to abort immediately. Wind conditions are approaching critical limits." "Negative, Viper 1. We're committed to this pickup. Ground team is already moving toward our position." Through her sensors, Sarah could see the drama unfolding in the valley below. The helicopter was struggling against increasingly violent wind shear, while Morrison's ground team moved quickly across the valley floor toward the landing zone. The timing would be critically close. Then disaster struck. A sudden downdraft caught the helicopter during its landing approach, slamming the aircraft toward the rocky valley floor with force that exceeded the pilot's ability to compensate. Sarah watched in horror as the Black Hawk hit hard and rolled onto its side, the rotor blades striking the ground and disintegrating in a shower of debris. "Sabre 4 is down! Sabre 4 is down!" The helicopter pilot's voice crackled through the radio, strained but coherent. "We have injured personnel and the aircraft is non-functional. Request immediate assistance." Sarah immediately switched to emergency procedures, her training taking over as she assessed the new situation. The helicopter crew was now trapped in the valley along with Morrison's ground team. The weather was continuing to deteriorate, and conventional rescue assets couldn't reach them until conditions improved, which might be hours or days. "All stations, this is Viper 1 declaring a search and rescue emergency. We have aircraft down with multiple personnel requiring immediate extraction from confined terrain." The exercise controller's voice came through her headset with unusual urgency. "Viper 1, this is Control. Weather reports indicate conditions will remain below minimums for at least 12 hours. Do you have an alternative extraction plan?" Sarah looked at her fuel gauges, calculated flight time to the nearest suitable runway, and made the decision that would define her career. "Control, Viper 1. I'm going to attempt aircraft extraction from the valley floor, requesting emergency clearance and crash rescue standing by." "Viper 1, that's an extremely dangerous procedure. Are you certain this is advisable?" "Control, I have 8 personnel trapped in a valley with injured among them and deteriorating weather. This is our only option." Sarah began her descent toward the valley, her aircraft's landing lights cutting through the darkness to illuminate the rough terrain below. The approach required precise speed and altitude control. Too fast, and she wouldn't be able to stop before hitting the valley walls. Too slow, and she risked losing control in the turbulent wind conditions. "Hammer 6, Viper 1. I'm coming down to get you. Need you to clear the landing area of debris and mark the edges with whatever light sources you have available." Morrison's voice carried a mixture of amazement and concern. "Viper 1, are you sure about this? That terrain wasn't designed for fixed-wing aircraft operations." "I'm sure. Have your people ready to board immediately when I touch down. I won't be able to shut down engines. This will be a hot extraction." Sarah configured her aircraft for short field landing operations, extending flaps and deploying speed brakes to achieve maximum drag and minimum landing distance. The Super Hornet's fly-by-wire flight controls helped manage the complex aerodynamics, but the final approach still demanded split-second reactions and absolute precision. The valley walls rushed past her wingtips as she descended toward the improvised landing strip. Rocks and debris scattered across the surface created a hazard course that required constant control inputs to maintain aircraft alignment. Sarah's hands moved automatically across the controls, her training and experience guiding the aircraft through conditions that would have been impossible for a less skilled pilot. The main landing gear touched down with a jarring impact that sent vibrations through the entire airframe. Sarah immediately deployed thrust reversers and applied maximum braking, fighting to stop the aircraft before reaching the valley walls. The Super Hornet's sophisticated systems managed the enormous forces involved, but she could feel the aircraft straining against the limits of its design. "Engines staying online? Move fast!" she called through her radio as the aircraft finally came to a stop just short of the rocky valley wall. Morrison's team moved with the efficiency of professionals who understood that speed meant survival. The injured helicopter crew was loaded first, followed by the ground team members. Each second on the ground increased the risk of damage to her aircraft and the possibility that weather conditions would make takeoff impossible. "All personnel aboard, go, go, go." Sarah applied full military power, the twin engines generating maximum thrust as the overloaded aircraft began its takeoff roll. The additional weight of 8 passengers pushed the Super Hornet beyond its normal operating envelope, requiring every inch of available runway and perfect technique to achieve flying speed. The aircraft lifted off just as the valley walls seemed ready to claim it, climbing steeply through the turbulent air toward clearer skies above the mountain peaks. Sarah felt the tension leave her shoulders as they cleared the highest terrain and established contact with air traffic control. Control, Viper 1 airborne with 8 personnel recovered. Request immediate vector to the nearest medical facility. Viper 1, outstanding work. Vector 270 degrees to Nelly's Air Force Base. Emergency medical personnel are standing by. As Sarah guided her aircraft toward the base, she was surprised to hear Morrison's voice through the intercom system connecting the passenger compartment to the cockpit. Lieutenant Commander Chen, what you just did was extraordinary. I've been in special operations for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that aircraft handling. Just doing my job, Captain. Getting you home safe is what air support is supposed to do. That wasn't just air support, Morrison replied. That was something much more impressive. The landing at Nelly's Air Force Base was routine compared to the Valley extraction, but Sarah felt the weight of exhaustion settling over her as she finally shut down the engines. The injured helicopter crew was transported immediately to the base medical facility, while Morrison and his team gathered around her aircraft as she climbed down from the cockpit. "Ma'am," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached, his earlier skepticism completely absent. "I owe you an apology. What you did tonight, that was the most professional flying I've ever witnessed." The other operators nodded in agreement, their respect evident in both words and body language. Sarah had proven herself beyond any doubt, demonstrating capabilities that transcended the usual boundaries between air and ground operations. But as she looked toward the next day's mission board, she knew the most challenging tests were still ahead. Desert Forge was far from over. The final day of Desert Forge dawned with an ominous stillness that every experienced military professional recognized as the calm before an exceptionally challenging storm. Sarah stood on the flight line at 500, watching the sun paint the Nevada mountains in shades of gold and crimson while reviewing the mission parameters that would conclude the most demanding exercise of her career. Everything they had learned, every skill they had developed, every bond of trust they had forged would be tested in the next 12 hours. The culminating scenario was unlike anything she had encountered in over a decade of military aviation. A complex multi-domain operation requiring simultaneous coordination between air, land, sea, and space assets to rescue hostages from a heavily defended compound while preventing the enemy from escaping with critical intelligence. The exercise controllers had designed the mission to push every participating unit beyond their comfort zones and into the realm where only exceptional performance could guarantee success. Captain Morrison approached through the pre-dawn darkness, his expression carrying the weight of command responsibility that had grown heavier with each passing day of the exercise. "Lieutenant Commander, I need to discuss today's mission with you. The scenario has been modified based on intelligence updates." Sarah looked up from her mission planning materials, immediately recognizing the tone that indicated significant complications. "What's changed, sir?" "The enemy force has been reinforced with simulated advanced air defense systems and fighter aircraft. Intelligence suggests they're expecting a rescue attempt and have positioned assets specifically to counter our air operations." Morrison handed her an updated intelligence briefing that painted a sobering picture of the challenges ahead. The enemy had deployed mobile surface-to-air missiles, radar-guided anti-aircraft artillery, and at least 2 fighter aircraft flown by experienced aggressor pilots trained to replicate the tactics of potential adversaries. "The good news is that we've been reinforced as well," Morrison continued. "You'll have a wingman for today's operations, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, an Air Force F-35 pilot with extensive combat experience." Sarah reviewed the tactical situation, mentally calculating the complex coordination required to successfully penetrate the enemy's defenses while providing effective close air support to multiple ground teams operating simultaneously. The mission would push her aircraft and skills to their absolute limits, but the addition of a capable wingman provided tactical flexibility that significantly improved their chances of success. "What's the timeline for the operation?" "Ground teams begin movement at 800. We need air cover during our approach, precision strikes to neutralize the perimeter defenses, close air support during the assault phase, and immediate response capability if the enemy attempts to escape with the intelligence materials." Sarah studied the target area imagery, nodding the sophisticated defensive preparations that had been established since their last reconnaissance. The enemy force had clearly learned from the previous day's exercises and adapted their tactics accordingly. Guard positions had been repositioned to provide better protection from air attack. Decoy installations had been constructed to confuse targeting systems, and mobile assets were being moved regularly to prevent accurate intelligence gathering. "This is going to require perfect coordination," she observed. "One mistake in timing or communication could compromise the entire operation." "Agreed. That's why I wanted to discuss coordination procedures with you personally. The ground teams will be operating under radio silence until they're in position for the final assault. Your initial strikes will be the signal for all units to begin their coordinated attack." At 600, Sarah met her wingman for the first time. Lieutenant Colonel Webb was a seasoned pilot whose reputation had preceded him. Over 200 combat missions, multiple air-to-air victories, and a distinguished record in both Afghanistan and Syria. His F-35 Lightning II represented the latest in stealth technology and sophisticated sensor systems, providing capabilities that would complement her Super Hornet's proven versatility. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," Webb said, extending his hand with the easy confidence of a pilot accustomed to challenging operations. "I've heard impressive things about your performance during this exercise." "Thank you, sir. I'm looking forward to working with someone who understands complex air operations." They spent the next hour coordinating their tactics, establishing communication procedures, and rehearsing the sequence of attacks that would be required to penetrate the enemy's layered defenses. Webb's F-35 would use its stealth characteristics to approach undetected and eliminate the most dangerous air defense systems, while Sarah's Super Hornet would deliver precision strikes against hardened targets and provide close air support during the ground assault. "The key to success will be timing," Webb explained as they reviewed their approach routes. "I need to eliminate their radar systems before they detect your approach, but not so early that they have time to activate backup systems or reposition their mobile assets." "How much lead time do you need?" "Give me 10 minutes to penetrate their airspace and identify the primary threats. When I call 'rifles away' on the radar installations, begin your approach immediately. That will give us maximum surprise and minimum time for them to react." At 7:45, both aircraft launched into clear morning skis, climbing rapidly toward their assigned operating areas. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied the beginning of complex combat operations, her senses sharpening and focus narrowing to the essential elements of the mission ahead. "Viper 1, this is Lightning 7. I'm approaching the target area and beginning reconnaissance. Stand by for target updates." Sarah maintained position 20 miles from the objective, monitoring Webb's progress through their tactical data link, while scanning for any threats that might have been missed during intelligence preparation. Her weapons systems were armed and ready, with a mixed loadout of precision-guided bombs, air-to-surface missiles, and cannon ammunition for close air support. "Viper 1, Lightning 7. I've identified 6 radar sites, 4 mobile SAM launchers, and what appears to be a command vehicle coordinating their air defense network. Beginning my attack sequence now." Through her data link, Sarah watched as Webb's F-35 maneuvered into attack position, its stealth characteristics allowing it to approach the targets without detection. The Lightning II's advanced sensors provided detailed targeting information that was automatically shared with her aircraft, creating a comprehensive picture of the enemy's defensive disposition. "Lightning 7, rifles away on primary targets. Radar network is going down now." Sarah immediately began her approach toward the target area, descending to low altitude while activating her electronic warfare systems to counter any remaining enemy sensors. Her targeting display showed the results of Webb's attacks, multiple radar installations destroyed, and the enemy's coordinated air defense network severely degraded. "Viper 1 is inbound on secondary targets. Lightning 7, can you confirm status of the mobile launchers?" 2 mobile launchers destroyed, 2 still operational but relocating. I'm maneuvering for follow-up attacks." Sarah acquired the remaining targets on her sensors and began her attack sequence, selecting appropriate weapons for each target type. The first precision-guided bomb eliminated a command bunker that had been coordinating the enemy's defensive response, while follow-up strikes neutralized ammunition storage areas and vehicle parks. "Excellent hits, Viper 1. Primary defenses are neutralized. Ground teams are beginning their assault. The next phase of the operation required split-second timing and absolute precision. Morrison's SEAL team was advancing on the main compound, while Army Rangers secured the perimeter and Marine Force Recon eliminated any remaining resistance. Sarah's role was to provide close air support while preventing enemy forces from escaping with the critical intelligence materials. Viper 1, this is Hammer 6. We're encountering heavy resistance at the main entrance. Request immediate suppression of enemy positions on the north side of the compound. Sarah rolled into an attack run, her targeting systems locking onto the enemy positions while calculating the precise cannon fire needed to neutralize the threats without endangering friendly forces. The margin for error was measured in meters, requiring perfect coordination between air and ground elements. Hammer 6, Viper 1 is in hot. Take cover. Her 20mm cannon fire walked across the enemy positions with devastating precision, each burst carefully aimed to suppress defensive fire while avoiding any possibility of friendly casualties. The high-explosive rounds impacted exactly where they were needed, allowing Morrison's team to advance through the breach. Outstanding shooting, Viper 1. Resistance is neutralized. But the mission was far from over. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were attempting to escape through a secondary exit with the critical materials that the hostage rescue was designed to prevent from falling into hostile hands. All aircraft, this is Control. We have multiple vehicles departing the compound through the eastern exit. Intercept and prevent escape at all costs. Sarah immediately maneuvered toward the escape route, her sensors tracking 3 vehicles moving rapidly away from the compound through rough terrain that limited her attack options. Webb's F-35 was engaging remaining air defense systems and couldn't immediately assist with the interdiction mission. Lightning 7, Viper 1. I have 3 vehicles attempting escape through the eastern valley. Request immediate assistance. Viper 1, I'm tied up with enemy fighters that just appeared on scope. You're on your own for now. Sarah found herself in the most challenging tactical situation of the entire exercise. Multiple moving targets in confined terrain, with the critical mission requirement to prevent their escape, while avoiding collateral damage to potential hostages or intelligence materials that might be aboard the vehicles. She selected air-to-surface missiles designed for precision strikes against moving targets, but the narrow valley and rocky terrain created significant challenges for weapon employment. The missiles needed clear line of sight to their targets, but the vehicles were using the terrain to mask their movement and complicate targeting solutions. Control, Viper 1. Targets are using terrain masking to avoid engagement. I need them to break cover for clear shots. Copy, Viper 1. Can you force them into the open? Sarah studied the topographical display, identifying a choke point where the valley narrowed to a single passable route. If she could position herself correctly, she might be able to force the vehicles into the open through tactical maneuvering rather than direct attack. Control, I'm going to try something. Stand by. She dove toward the valley floor, using her aircraft's speed and maneuverability to position herself directly in the escape route. The vehicles would have to choose between stopping, turning around, or attempting to continue past her aircraft, any of which would expose them to effective weapon engagement. The lead vehicle emerged from behind a rocky outcropping directly ahead of her aircraft, the driver apparently surprised by the sudden appearance of a fighter aircraft in his escape route. Sarah immediately engaged with cannon fire, the precision rounds disabling the vehicle without causing the catastrophic damage that might have destroyed intelligence materials. The second and third vehicles attempted to reverse course, but Sarah was already maneuvering for follow-up attacks. Her cannon fire found each target with surgical precision, disabling their mobility while preserving their cargo for recovery by ground forces. Control, Viper 1. All 3 escape vehicles are neutralized and secured. No secondary explosions or catastrophic damage observed. Outstanding work, Viper 1. Ground teams are moving to secure the vehicles now. Webb's voice crackled through her headset as he concluded his engagement with the enemy fighters. Viper 1, Lightning 7. Enemy air threat is neutralized. How did you handle those vehicles? Precision cannon work and tactical positioning. Sometimes old-school methods work better than high-tech solutions. As the exercise concluded, and all units returned to base, Sarah reflected on the past 2 weeks and the profound changes that had occurred in both her capabilities and the respect she had earned from the special operations community. What had begun as a skeptical assessment of her qualifications had evolved into genuine recognition of exceptional skills and professionalism. Captain Morrison met her on the flight line as she completed her post-flight inspection, his expression carrying something she had rarely seen from the reserved SEAL officer: unqualified admiration. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, I need to tell you something. In 15 years of special operations, I've worked with dozens of pilots from every branch of service. What you've accomplished during this exercise goes beyond exceptional flying. You've redefined what we thought was possible in air-ground coordination." "Thank you, sir. This has been an honor and a privilege." "The honor has been ours. You've raised the bar for everyone who participated in this exercise." As Sarah walked away from her aircraft for the final time during Desert Forge, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing she had proven herself in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. The skeptical operators who had questioned her presence 2 weeks ago now sought her out to discuss tactical innovations and coordinate future training opportunities. But more importantly, she had demonstrated once again that excellence in military aviation had nothing to do with preconceptions or assumptions. It came from training, experience, dedication, and the courage to perform when everything was on the line. She had risen without a word, and her actions had spoken louder than any speech ever could.